This is why you should be very careful about allowing people to charge their phones in your house, shop, or workplace. This young man just lost his life, all because of an innocent act of kindness he showed to a fellow neighbor. In Nigeria, where power supply is inconsistent in most areas, it is common for people to look for places to charge their devices. This could be a business center that requires electricity to operate, places like barbing salons, laundry dry cleaning centers, shops, and sometimes a neighbor's house. However, what seems like a simple act of kindness can sometimes lead to unexpected and devastating consequences. This heartbreaking story is guaranteed to definitely leave you feeling very angry and at the same time sad about how wicked a person can be. It will also help you understand why it is important that you let anyone opting to charge their mobile phone in your house know that they are doing so at their own risk. It all started on the night of June 15, 2024. It was a Saturday night and there was no power supply in the Agbor area, a community in Delta State, Nigeria, where 29-year-old Joe Philip resided. Joe Philip lived with his pregnant wife in his father's house, their family house in Agbor. His father, Mr. Philip Eboku, was a vigilante and had gone to work that evening. Due to the absence of power supply that Saturday evening, Joe Philip decided to turn on his generator. After he did this, a neighbor identified as Madam Maureen came to the house and asked Joe Philip to help her charge her phone. It was a Nokia touchlight phone. Madam Maureen wasn't a stranger to Joe Philip. Their houses were relatively close to each other, and it wasn't the first time she had come to his house to charge her phone. So, Joe did what he has always been doing for her. He helped her charge her phone. But little did he know that this action he just took would later turn out to be one that would leave his pregnant wife and family with lasting pains and sorrow, a final act of kindness that his family would wish he never granted if they were to turn back the hands of time. Madam Maureen's plan was to leave the phone in Joe Philip's house to charge overnight. After charging the phone, Joe Philip fell asleep. He forgot to lock the door to his room. When he woke up early in the morning, around 4 a.m., he realized that both his phone and Madam Maureen's phone had gone missing from his room. He checked his room carefully to see if his wife or family member had unplugged them to keep somewhere safe, but he still couldn't find the phones. He asked his family members about the whereabouts of the two phones, but no one knew anything about them. It then dawned on him that the two phones had been stolen. Around 4:45 a.m. Sunday morning, Joe Philip borrowed his wife's phone to call his father, Mr. Philip Eboku, who was on duty that night. He informed him about the stolen phones and asked him to come back home. His father told him that he couldn't leave his work by 4:45 a.m. because it was still dark, and as a vigilante living by that time, anything could happen in his absence. He told Joe to wait for the day to break, that when he comes back, he will help him sort everything out. When the day finally broke, Mr. Boku hurriedly returned home to attend to his son's situation. This was Sunday morning and also Father's Day, a day Joe Philip was supposed to be celebrating his father for all he had done for him. Some minutes later, Madam Maureen came to pick up her phone. She was told that the phone had been stolen, and not just her phone, but also Joe Philip's phone. Mr. Philip Eboku, being an elderly man, intervened to see how he could broker a solution to the situation, but Madam Maureen wasn't having it. She accused Joe Philip of stealing her phone, which was ridiculous because that was not her first time charging her phone there. She had been plugging the same phone in Joe's house countless times. Also, this is a Nokia touchlight phone we are talking about. It's not an iPhone, a Samsung phone, or any of those high-end smartphones that, if stolen and resold, the money gotten from the resale would still be tangible. Her phone had little to no resale value, so why would Joe Philip steal it from his own house for that matter? Joe Philip pleaded against the accusation and assured her that he did not steal her phone, and that if it would make her feel any better, his phone was also stolen. People from the same street also reported that they were robbed that night. some of them also had their phones stolen the same night. So it was possible that Joe's house was robbed that same night too, especially when you consider the fact that the door wasn't locked. It would have been much easier to get a grasp of the whole situation if he actually locked the door that night, because at least there would have been a sign of forced entry which would have suggested robbery. Unfortunately, there was no sign of forced entry or anything to indicate that a robbery took place in the compound that night, which further made the situation more complicated. But it won't be so complicated when the truth finally comes out. Since it was a Sunday morning and they were all Christians, Mr. Boku suggested that the woman should just calm down for the time being and go to church. He promised her that they would take their time to search for the two phones, and that if at the end of the day her phone is still not found, he will buy her a new phone to replace the stolen one. Mr. Morin remained adamant and turned deaf ears to all pleas. She rejected Mr. Boku's proposal of being bought a new phone as a replacement and insisted that she wanted her exact same phone with her SIM card, contacts, and messages fully intact. She was asking for the impossible, and she knew this very well. But what others didn't know was that Madame Morin had a plan of her own. Before she left Mr. Boku's compound that morning, she vowed that she would teach Joe Philip a lesson. After this incident, Joe had his bath, dressed up, and went to church that morning. On his way back from church, this was when things took a terrifying turn. Madame Morin had gone to meet one Mr. Ben, who is reported to have been her boyfriend. Mr. Ben was from Kogi State, but resided in Delta State. He was a member of a vigilante group called the Anioma Security Watch Network. Mr. Ben, being in a position of power, at least that was what he believed, then decided to gather about 4 other members of his vigilante group to lay in wait for Joe Philip. When they sighted Joe coming back from church, they grabbed him and then took him to their office. Mr. Boku was then informed and he rushed down to the office where his son was held. On getting there, he explained the situation to them and also told them that he is also a vigilante. He showed them his ID card, but surprisingly, it didn't matter to them. They seized Mr. Boku's phone and ID card and then restrained the elderly man by tying him with rope. They then began beating him along with his son. The beating was so severe that Joe Philip could not take it anymore. Around 3 p.m. that Sunday, Joe Philip passed away inside the office. When the men noticed that Joe was no longer alive, they untied his father and then ran away from the office. Mr. Ben then informed Madame Morin that, "Look, this guy you told us to deal with has passed away, and we are fleeing the area." By this time, the news had already started spreading in the community. Mr. Boku's sister and some members of his own vigilante group had already rushed down to the office where they saw Joe Philip's lifeless body. Tension began building up within the community, and people were clearly angry about the whole situation. Then, just as the anger was reaching its boiling point, a shocking revelation hit the town like a thunderbolt. Something no one would have ever predicted, something so unexpected and yet very infuriating that it threw the whole community into a fit of rage, which later took the intervention of both policemen and the army to quell the situation. In a shocking twist of events, it turned out that the missing phone was not stolen by an outsider, but by someone right under the nose of Madame Morin. When Joe Philip slept off that night, Madame Morin's son sneaked into his bedroom and unplugged his mother's phone without informing Joe Philip. He then kept the phone to himself and never gave it to his mother. When the news broke that Joe Philip had been killed over the supposed stolen phone, the boy then gave the phone to Mr. Ben, Madame Morin's boyfriend, who spearheaded the whole attack that resulted in Joe Philip's death. Mr. Ben then gave the phone to Madame Morin, and the truth about the missing phone began spreading. This further infuriated the already provoked community members because an innocent man with a pregnant wife had just been killed over a false accusation. When the boy was asked why he didn't inform Joe Philip before taking the phone, he responded that Joe was asleep and that he didn't want to wake him. People were angered by this revelation and they began attacking the patrol vehicle of the Anioma Vigilante group. They also destroyed their office where Joe Philip was held captive. The angry crowd then turned their attention towards Madame Morin, But when they arrived at her home, she and every occupant of the building had run away for safety. The angry mob then attempted to set the building on fire, but due to the timely intervention of both policemen and soldiers, the damage was contained. Joe Phillips' lifeless body was carried by the community members to the mortuary, while the family was left devastated and in tears. There is a lot to be angry about from this story. It is very clear that Madam Maureen was a troublemaker because unless she had the president's phone number in her Nokia Touchlight phone, there is absolutely no reason why she shouldn't have agreed to the peaceful option of getting a replacement. The lost SIM cards could have easily been retrieved, and the lost contacts can always be restored with time. But the fact that she insisted on getting her exact phone with everything intact showed the kind of person she really was. She caused the whole trouble with confidence because she knew she had connections with someone at a certain level of power in person of Mr. Ben, her boyfriend. And Mr. Ben, in a bid to please his lover, decided to take matters into his own hands. His reckless actions have left a pregnant woman without a husband and also a child who will grow up without his biological father. His actions have also thrown a family into mourning, leaving an elderly man to be forever tormented by the memories of his beloved son getting beaten and murdered in cold blood in his very own presence. The family has requested for justice for their late son. It is clear that the vigilante members would be charged with murder, but what is not clear is what Madam Maureen will be charged with, because she didn't specifically give an order for Joe Philip to be killed. She wasn't even a witness to the crime. If you have an idea about the potential charges she could face, do well to leave it in the comments below. I must say that at the time this video was made, the 5 vigilante members who murdered Joe Philip, as well as Madam Maureen and her family, are still at large. This means that the case is still under investigation, so make sure to like, subscribe, and most importantly, turn on the notification bell so that you'll be promptly notified when I publish an update on this case. This story highlights the need to be very careful about allowing people to come into your house, shop, or workplace to charge phones, because what you would consider an act of kindness to a fellow neighbor may someday turn into a tragedy that will leave long-lasting pains and regrets. If you run a business center where people come to plug their phones and other electronics, do well to print out a notice stating that the charging of phones in such a place is at the owner's risk and that you will not be held responsible for any theft or damage incurred during the process. Pin this notice to where the socket is so that it will be visible to everyone. By doing this, you get to absolve yourself from any case of theft or damage that occurs during the time the phone is placed in your custody. Also, be very careful about allowing people to leave their things under your care. Let's say you are waiting for your turn in a salon and someone who plugged his or her phone there then decides to leave it behind and asks you to watch over it. If you accept to do this, you put yourself at risk of having to take responsibility for any theft or damage that occurs during the owner's absence. So let's be very careful because no good deed goes unpunished. Thank you for watching, stay safe, and see you in the next video.